Changes in the Land by William Cronon, Preface. I have tried in this book to write an ecological history of colonial New England. By this, I mean a history which extends its boundaries beyond human institutions, economies, class and gender systems, political organizations, cultural rituals, to the natural ecosystems which provide the context for those institutions. Different peoples choose different ways of interacting with their surrounding environments, and their choices ramify through not only the human community, but the larger ecosystem as well. Writing a history of such relationship inevitably brings to center stage a cast of non-human characters which usually occupy the margins of historical analysis, if they are present at all. Much of this book is devoted to evaluating the changing circumstances of such things as pine trees, pigs, beavers, soils, fields of corn, forest watersheds, and other elements of the New England landscape. My thesis is simple. The shift from Indian to European dominance in New England entailed important changes, well known to historians, in the ways these people organized their lives, but it also involved fundamental reorganizations less well known to historians in the region's plant and animal communities. To the cultural consequences of the European invasion, what historians sometimes call the frontier process, we must add the ecological ones as well. All were connected by complex relationships which require the tools of an ecologist as well as those of a historian to be properly understood. The great strength of ecological analysis in writing history is its ability to uncover processes and long-term changes which might otherwise remain invisible. It is especially helpful in evaluating, as I do here, historical changes in modes of production. In one sense, economy, in such an approach, becomes a subset of ecology. I have accordingly structured my argument to take best advantage of this analytical strength. I open by contrasting the pre-colonial ecosystems of New England with those that existed at the beginning of the 19th century. I then compare the ecological relationships of pre-colonial Indian communities with those of the arriving Europeans, especially in terms of how the respective groups conceived of owning property and so bounding ecosystems. Having framed the argument with these sets of contrasts, I spend the rest of the book describing the processes of ecological change that followed the Europeans' arrival. My purpose throughout is to explain why New England habitats changed as they did during the colonial period. It is not my intention to rewrite the human history of the region. This is not a history of New England Indians, or of Indian colonial relations, or of the transformation of English colonists from Puritans to Yankees. Indeed, the reader should be careful not to draw the wrong conclusions about these subjects on the basis of my text. Although I attribute much of the changing ecology of New England to the colonists' more inclusive sense of property and their involvement in a capitalist economy, both present to some extent from the 1620s onward, I do not mean to suggest that the nature of the colonial economy underwent no fundamental alterations between 1620 and 1800. It of course did, and some of those alterations, by accentuating tendencies already present, accelerated the process of ecological change. Equally important, the reader must be very clear that the Indians were no more static than the colonists in their activities and organizations. When I describe pre-colonial Indian ways of life, I intend no suggestion that these were somehow purer or more Indian than the ways of life Indians chose or were forced into following their contact with colonists. Indians did not define their Indianness solely in terms of ecological relationships, and many of them retained their sense of identity and their resistance to colonialism even after their effective military power and political autonomy had been destroyed. Because I seek primarily to explain ecological change, I devote relatively little attention to the political and military ways in which Europeans subjugated Indian peoples. These are, by now, I hope, fairly well known to the broader outline. But I trust that the reader will pursue further reading about them in the books I discuss in the bibliographical essay. Although I have based my argument, wherever possible, on primary sources, any book of this kind must inevitably rely on the work of other scholars in other disciplines. Marshall Solins once described interdisciplinary research as the process by which the unknowns of one's own subject are multiplied by the uncertainties of some other science. Like Solins, I think the benefit of interdisciplinary work outweigh the dangers, but I share his sense of risk. I have sometimes felt perilously unsure of myself as I have made my way through alien territory in anthropology, ecology, and colonial history. Fortunately, I have been blessed with guides who have pointed me clear of obvious errors whenever they could. Chief among them is Edmund S. Morgan, who originally suggested the subject of this book as a seminar paper I wrote for him 4 years ago. He was responsible for convincing me that the project was feasible in the first place, and he provided both criticism and moral support throughout its gestation. For a number of years now, Howard Lamar has been my mentor in all things pertaining to Western history, and I am grateful to him not only for his advice about this book, but for his tolerance of my unplanned excursion onto the New England frontier. This book could not have been written without the resources and community of Yale University. Aside from a brief excursion to Harvard's Widener Library and university archives, all of my research was done at Yale. One of the delights, and sometimes irritations, of interdisciplinary work is the way it takes one to library call letters, library stack floors, and in fact, entire libraries one has never visited before. In addition to my accustomed haunts in the Sterling and Beinecke libraries, I found myself visiting Yale's anthropology, art and architecture, divinity school, forestry, geology, Klein science, law, ornithology, Sealy Mud, and social science libraries. I am indebted to their librarians and the institution which has assembled their collections. Particularly helpful was Joseph Miller, the Yale Forestry School librarian, who has a strong interest in the project from the start. Many other friends have helped out in a variety of ways. George Miles has been a firm and constructive critic of the way I analyze the New England Indians. And although I am sure he continues to disagree with some of my interpretations, I have benefited a great deal from his suggestions. Timothy Weiskell has tried to keep me honest in my anthropological interpretations, and has been my chief guide in the literature of economic and ecological anthropology. Rebecca Borman has been my most reliable and helpful ecologist critic. Others who have discussed the book with me and given me the benefit of their criticism include Jean-Christophe Agnew, Elizabeth Blackmore, John Blum, Laurie Gitzberg, Fran Hallahan, Tom Hotley, David Jaffe, Tim Mitchell, Michael Saperstein, Robert Schell, Paula Shields, Barbara Smith, Gaddis Smith, Michael Smith, Robert Westbrook, and Robin Winks. To all, I give thanks. Arthur Wang is perhaps the most congenial and encouraging publisher into whose hands a young historian could hope to fall, and I can only add my praise to the chorus one hears from his other authors. He and Eric Foner were model editors. A special note of thanks goes to my friend David Scobie, who not only gave me an exhaustive critical reading of the manuscript in all its stages of completion, but engaged in long hours of discussion about it in the midst of his own busy schedule. This book, in many ways, is a direct result of our extended conversations and would have been much the worse without them. Finally, my wife Nan, not to mention our golden retriever Kira, has been my companion on hikes and drives from New Haven to Cape Cod to Mount Washington, during which we have together learned most of what we know of New England landscape. For these and other journey things, I dedicate this book to her. William Cronon, New Haven, Connecticut, January 1st, 1983.